Today in the embassy we have Dr. Alan Connorton, the Science Advisor for East Asia Pacific Bureau. Dr. Connorton's here in New Zealand to attend the Pacific Energy Summit up in Auckland. Welcome, Dr. Connorton.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Please call me Ellen.
So Alan, once again, welcome to New Zealand. I understand that working for the Department of State is relatively new for you.
Yes.
Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what you do in EAP.
Well, I'm a science advisor and I concentrate on Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands. These are countries where we have both very important bilateral relationships and multilateral relationships. My areas at the State Department are environment, science, technology, and health. My own background's in public health, but I cover all of those different areas. And around Australia and New Zealand, these are around our bilateral cooperations on science and technology, and for the Pacific Islands, it's more towards a concern of the development and welfare of the islands.
Right. And you're here for the Pacific Energy Summit, which starts in Auckland this Sunday.
Yes.
Can you just tell me a little bit about, perhaps about the summit, but in particular, what do you see as the key issues for energy in the Pacific?
Well, the Pacific Islands are particularly energy challenged. They don't have the natural resources to produce their own energy, and consequently most of their energy is generated through imported diesel fuel, which among other things is very expensive and not very environmentally friendly. So that generates their electricity, almost everything, and this is something that's been recognized as a real burden from the islands. Not being able to have affordable electricity is a barrier towards economic development. It's a barrier towards easy living and all kinds of things. Foreign Minister Key in New Zealand had recognized that the energy was a big issue for the Pacific Islands, and he announced the summit at the Pacific Islands Forum last year, and the summit will be co-sponsored with the European Union and New Zealand in Auckland next Sunday through Wednesday. And it's bringing together representatives from the Pacific Islands, both their government representatives and utilities personnel, and they will be in a meeting forum with projects ready to go on renewable energy and members of the donor community. So it's kind of like speed dating around renewable energy for the Pacific Islands.
That's a great term. So the US obviously has a lot of collaboration with New Zealand on issues in the Pacific, such as energy. Can you perhaps talk about some of the other areas of within the science and technology sphere that the US is working with New Zealand on?
Yes, we have a very well-established collaboration with New Zealand on science and technology issues, particularly facilitated through the Joint Commission Meeting Strategy, which is a series of meetings that brings experts from the two countries together to talk about areas of mutual concern. There have already been 3 Joint Commission meetings, we call them JCMs, between New Zealand and the United States. They move back and forth between the countries every 2 years. The 4th one will be in Wellington in 2014. And the principal areas that the two countries have been collaborating on include climate science, which is, and not just pertaining to New Zealand and the United States, but the whole Pacific region. A lot on both health and health innovation and technology, again focusing not just on issues of mutual concern to the two countries, but on issues of importance to the Pacific Islands, and marine science, again throughout the region. And then there's an overarching issue that the two countries identified at the last JCM meeting, which was issues of women in science and the importance of increasing women's participation in science and some of the sort of systemic barriers in place in both countries.
Excellent. And your own background, I see, is in public health.
Yes, public health and health policy.
So what do you see as some of the major public health issues in the Pacific in the future?
Well, for the Pacific Islands, it's interesting because they're facing a challenge that's very similar to what we are experiencing in the United States or in New Zealand, which is the challenge of non-communicable disease. Non-communicable disease, as the name implies, are things that are not contagious, but that can still occur. The principal ones that we focus on are things like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease, and cancer. Contributing to these is obesity and unhealthy food behavior, tobacco use, alcohol use, all kinds of things. Other non-communicable diseases include things like Alzheimer's disease, which is increasing. All of these diseases are on the uptake, partly due to lifestyle and partly due to economic and social changes that have contributed to changes in lifestyle. And it's impacting the Pacific Islands in particular. They are the part of the world with the highest rate of mortality from non-communicable disease. Globally, the burden of NCDs is about 63%, but in the Pacific Islands it's 75%, which is really high.
And I understand that a lot of your research background has been in the sort of the occupational health sphere,
Yes.
particularly looking at violence prevention and suicide prevention.
That's the case.
Suicide prevention is quite a key issue here in New Zealand. Can you perhaps tell us how the US is looking into the same issue?
I'd be happy to talk about that. It's an issue that came to the public policy agenda in the United States in the 1990s under Surgeon General David Satcher, who recognized that suicide was a major public health problem that hadn't really been identified and put before the public before. And he launched the first national strategy for suicide prevention, or the process that developed it. We've just gone through a process of revising that. That first strategy was released at the beginning of the last decade, and we've gone over it and just issued a more recent one. And a lot of this focuses on things that can happen at the federal level, but there's also a lot happening at the state and local level, and trying to get each state to develop their own strategic plan for suicide prevention, targeting the most at-risk populations, the best types of interventions, just getting really good epidemiology data on this. And it's a really interesting area to look at data, because as with most things, when you first start to look at it, it starts to look worse, but it's not necessarily getting worse when you first start to look at the data. It's that your reporting becomes more accurate and better, and you're quantifying the problem. So it is one of the leading injury-related causes of death in the United States, and deaths from suicide exceed deaths from homicide, and hospitalizations due to self-inflicted injury are more prevalent than those due to interpersonal injury. And we're really starting to address it at all levels in our country.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Connorton, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us today. It's been fantastic taking you around Wellington and
Thank you.
Talking with the various groups around here. We wish you all the best for the Pacific Energy Summit, and we hope to see you again in the future.
Thank you. I look forward to coming back to Wellington. I've had a wonderful visit. Thank you.
Thanks.